Hello, everyone. First up, I'm going to say I don't normally sound quite as sort of sexy as this. So I'm pretending to be Margaret Pomerantz. Now, I've got a head cold, so just apologies for that. It's wonderful to be here. I have met so many people already, and generally I only know what they look like about that big, because I know most people from social media. So it's nice to see that we've all got arms and legs and bodies. Okay, I'm going to talk about be the change, but I want to talk about a particular type of change. I want to talk about how we can be the compassionate change. So I've become really kind of obsessed with this idea of compassion over the last few years. And so I want to share some of that enthusiasm with you. A lot of you would know me from Change Day Australia. So I founded Change Day Australia about 4 years ago, and I ran it for about 3 years. And what I did was I asked people who worked in healthcare to make a pledge to do one thing that would improve their patient outcomes. But the thing that took me by surprise was that above and beyond all of the pledges, the one thing that just kept coming up was that people wanted it to be better between them and their colleagues. They actually wanted to be kinder. They wanted to work in places that were more respectful. They wanted to see less bullying. They wanted to know that they could take their whole selves to work, and they wanted to really show up. And this kind of led me to this idea of how do we really make that happen? How important is compassion in the work that we do? And so on the back of that, I was awarded a social change fellowship from Westpac Bank, and I travelled to the UK, Europe, and the States. And my goal was, I want to meet people who are as fascinated by this idea of compassionate leadership and compassion in healthcare as I am. And indeed, I did. And so this talk is really kind of has come off the back of the things that I learned and how I came to create this thing called Compassion Lab. So before I go any further, I want to just kind of introduce you to this idea of compassion, because when I talk to people about compassion, they kind of get all sort of glazy-eyed, and they think I'm talking about things that are soft, you know, and often leaders will refer to my work as, oh, Mary could come in and she could do some of that soft stuff. Or they start thinking about like fluffy kittens and being kind and being really sweet and all of that. I'm not talking about that when I talk about compassion. I'm talking about something that is courageous. I'm talking about something that I could only think of as muscular, something that has the power to really change the way we do the work we do in healthcare and to change the relationships that we have with our patients, and indeed to change the outcomes for them. So when we talk about compassion, we think of it as having a number of components. I just want to quickly kind of go through and set this up so you understand what I'm meaning, and when people write about compassionate leadership, what they're talking about. And the first component is attending. One of the things we don't do so well is actually be in the present moment. We often don't just say hello to right now. And attending is being able to be exactly where you are and nowhere else so that you can notice. You can notice what is actually happening. And without noticing or attending, it is highly unlikely we will even see suffering and distress. The second component is understanding. And it's really important that having attended or paid attention to where we are and what is going on, that we actually understand that people are experiencing distress. So we do some thinking and we decide, I see what is happening here and it's not okay. And then empathising. Having paid attention and noticed what is happening for people and noticed the distress that they might be experiencing or the suffering, we start to empathise. And one of the reasons we often run away from the idea of empathising is that it causes us to be vulnerable. In order to truly empathise with someone, I've got to touch something inside of me that knows what it's like to feel pain and distress. knows what it's like to experience suffering. And the last is helping. And the thing that sets compassion apart from, say, being kind or being nice or being polite is it's action-oriented. We actually have to do something once we've followed these steps. We actually have to discern what is an action that we can take. Okay, so that's what compassion is. When we demonstrate compassion, we don't necessarily go through, have I attended, have I understood? We simply follow an act of compassion, but we will notice if we pull it apart that there's always some sort of action at the end. So, does it make a difference? Well, if it doesn't make a difference, I can stop talking now. So the answer that does it make a difference is yes, it makes a difference. It makes an enormous difference. And I want to tell you about a study that was done at the University of Florida by a guy called Amir Erez and his colleagues. And what Amir wanted to find out was he wanted to discover whether rudeness and poor behaviour at work, particularly in medical teams, whether it actually made an impact on patient outcomes. And so what he did was he set up a study, and it was a study with clinicians, 24 teams, NICU teams, and what he did was he told these teams, one doctor, I think 2 nurses in each team, and he told them that they would be observed. So they were given a simulated clinical exercise, and they knew that they were going to be observed. Now, one set of teams were observed, and they heard their observer say, "Thank you for allowing me to observe, and I hope this has been useful for you." That's our control team. We'll leave them to one side. Okay, what happened with the other teams? The other teams experienced very different responses from their observer. So let me just tell you what the simulation was. We had in the simulated research study, it was a preterm infant, rapidly deteriorating from memory. I think the child would be diagnosed with enterocolitis. You needed to act pretty rapidly. You'd want to get onto this, right? So in the second set of teams, what they heard the supervisor say, and this was an Israeli study, so they heard the supervisor say, "I'm not very impressed with what I've seen in medicine so far in Israel." That's first up. So let's see what you can do. And they went ahead in their simulated exercise. At 10 minutes, they were interrupted by the observer again, and the observer was heard to say, you guys, he didn't actually say they were hopeless, but he said, you guys, you're not working together as a team. I've never seen anything like this. You wouldn't get a job in my department. And he actually said, I hope I never get sick while I'm here. So what happens when we are diligently working, in this case, with a patient with a life-threatening condition? What happens when we hear that sort of rude and disrespectful remarks? And they are pretty mild, because what I hear from clinicians, and I get to talk to them a lot as I travel around Australia, I hear some pretty horrendous things that get said. So what do you think happened? Do you think it made a difference? Do you think we brush it off and we go on? We don't. We don't. Our prefrontal cortex doesn't work like that. We're actually not little machines with switch on, switch off buttons. And that's not what happened. They calculated that the amount of errors experienced in the team that heard those disrespectful remarks, it probably accounted for 52% of the errors that they made. They resuscitated poorly. They ventilated poorly. They did not work together collectively as a coherent team. Doctors prescribed incorrect medication. They diagnosed incorrectly, and nurses mixed wrong medication. And thankfully, it was simulation. On the other side to that, researchers have looked at what happens when we inject kindness and compassion into the health system. And it's a very, very different story. So the Centre for Compassion, Altruism, Research, Education, which is headed up by Jim Doty, a wonderful neurologist, wrote a book called Into the Magic Shop, which I rarely recommend that people buy books, but I just think his book is so good. So at Stanford University, they were asked by Dignity Health in the US to do a literature review, to do an international literature review. And Dignity Health wanted to know, does it matter if we're kind to our patients? Does it matter if we're compassionate? Yeah, it absolutely does. Because the things they found, I mean, you can see them and I'm not going to read them out, but just let's grab one. Here I am with a cold. So a person who experiences empathy from them in a medical consultation has a 16% reduction in overall cold severity. Well, I'll take that. So there are a range of things that proved to be quite different. So how does it affect patients? Patients who experience compassionate care are more likely to divulge important information, and that makes their diagnosis more accurate. We also know that people who present in emergency, who are treated with compassion, are actually less likely to return to emergency with the same medical condition, which is a completely different way of responding to our patients in emergency when the old, treat them tough so they won't come back, or that horrible disrespectful term that I still keep hearing and I can't believe, frequent flyers. So kindness actually has enormous benefits, and it actually benefits the people who are delivering the care as well. People who deliver care in kind and compassionate environments, health service environments, take less sick days. They report less stress. They develop a kind of more of a kind of robust immunity to burnout. In fact, the statistical significance of kindness-oriented care on improved health outcomes is pretty amazing when you sit it alongside aspirin and reducing heart attack. It's pretty significant. I think if the pharmaceutical companies could somehow manufacture kindness, if they could bottle it up, I reckon they'd make a fortune. When it comes to, so you're hearing all of this and you're thinking, wow, it really does make a difference. So what am I going to do? What's the thing that, Mary's up there and she's telling us, how important it is? Well, the message I have for you is that small is all. When it comes to compassion, small acts of compassion, small acts of kindness make a huge difference. And so I would ask you to be thinking, even over the next 3 days, maybe you could even be tweeting or letting each other know what is a micro move that you could make in your place of work, because we know that poor behaviour is really contagious. Okay, we've all had that experience. You're at work, the person who always comes to work with the big grey cloud hanging over their head has arrived, suddenly everyone feels completely flat. Well, it's the same with compassion. It is completely contagious. So I want you to be thinking about that, make a micro move. Now, I just want to give you a couple of little tips in case you're thinking it's great, you're thinking it's great, Mary, but you don't work where I work. Well, let me just introduce you to 3 interpretations that we all, from one time or another, will make that will close down our capacity for compassion, okay? And when we make these interpretations, the important thing to remember is that we make them at lightning speed. Our biases kick in much more quickly than we have a chance to kind of weigh it up and decide whether this is the way we're going to go. So these are 3 interpretations that will close down compassion, and we will experience them from time to time, and we will catch ourselves experiencing them. And one is blameworthy. When we think of other people as worthy of the blame, when we know that when people make serious mistakes, when our colleagues make serious mistakes that will be very costly, or some of the blame for that mistake may be linked to us, we are far less likely to be compassionate. We are far more likely to think of them as worthy of blame. You made the mess, you clean it up. That's worth knowing, because as I tell you each of these 3 things, it's worth knowing that it's so easy for us to step into that, because I'm going to give you an antidote in a second. The other is undeserving. And that it's very easy for us. We're walking down, I know I was in Melbourne recently and I was walking down the Burke Street Mall, and there are just at the moment there are so many homeless people visible in Melbourne. I haven't had a chance to walk around Brizzy yet. But for me, I find it incredibly sad. And we walk past, and it's so easy for us to look down and we see their little cardboard sign and they're telling us, what their little narrative, their little plea is. And it's so easy for us to think, well, you could get a job. And that thought can occur to us so quickly, and it will get in the way of our compassionate response. Or indeed, patients who keep presenting in our emergency ward with serious addictions that are causing other patients to have to be diverted to other hospitals. It's very easy for us to slip into that, well, do you really deserve the care? The other is when we feel we are completely at zero empty tank, and our colleague comes to us at the end of the day, and sometimes it's like that little knock on the door, and it's 6:30, and we've been there since the early hours of the morning, and we just want to go home. And one of our kids is having a birthday. At least we think it's today because we've been working so hard. We're not quite sure. Do I have a kid? And so we feel like you felt that, that kind of I'm on zero. And the colleague comes in, and the colleague says, "Can I have a word?" And it's like, I've got nothing to give you. That's another response that really gets in the way of us exercising compassion. So how do we turn this around? Okay, withholding blame. When you feel that sense of someone being blameworthy, take a moment I've started this little exercise where I say to myself, what's it like to be you? What's it like to be you? And if I grew up where you grew up, and if I had the same experience as you, and I lived in the same place as you, and all of those things, I reckon I behave like you. So I develop a sense of curiosity. The other is stepping into a place where we recognise that everybody is worthy. Everyone is just as worthy as everyone else. It's why I get cranky when people tell me, that a patient gets admitted to the hospital and they get a phone call from the CE or one of the executive directors saying, "Do you know who that is in emergency?" They're like, "Yeah, it's a patient." No. That's, and they tell them who it is. That person's very, very important. It's like, no, they're all very, very important. The third thing that I think is absolutely crucial is if we can cultivate presence, if we can actually start to learn how to be here in this present moment, and here we are, in this moment, which will never be repeated, then we loosen up on ourselves a little. And when the colleague knocks on the door, it kind of feels okay for us to say, "It's my kid's birthday tonight and I've got to head home. But I see that you're in distress. I'm really, really sorry. I'm going to be thinking about you. Maybe we can check in again later." Because we've cultivated a sense of where we are. We've started to develop some self-compassion, which is a whole other presentation. So we need new ways to lead. More than ever, we need to develop compassionate leadership. Everywhere I go, all the hospitals I visit, some places I have a lot of success because management teams say, "Come on in, give us a bit of the soft stuff and see what happens." And I manage to get my way in and convince them about the tenacity of compassion. But we really do need to work on that, which is why I've developed Compassion Lab. And Compassion Lab is an opportunity for people who work in healthcare to come together and to learn how to be more mindful, to learn about self-compassion, to learn about compassion for their patients and for their colleagues, and to just really show up together. And we're having beautiful experiences at Compassion Lab. So from time to time, I'm running labs around the place, so keep an eye out for them on my website, freerthinking.com.au. But I'm at the end of my talk now, and there's one really, really important thing that I want to leave you with. And it's a beautiful quote by Tennessee Williams. And when I read this, it it just rang home so true to me. We live in a perpetually burning building, and what we must save from it all the time is love. We work in a perpetually burning system, and what we must save from it all the time is love. Thank you.
Mary, that was wonderful. Thank you very much. We have a few questions. So I think we've all been there where we feel compassion fatigue, right? We just sort of slowly burn. Any thoughts, either general advice, specific advice, when you are just acutely done and you need some maybe point of care help, you need some sort of intervention right there for the person that you're working with, maybe a kind word or something? Are there any thoughts that you could share with us?
Yeah, we've all been in that place. We've certainly known colleagues who have. You know, Tim, I reckon we have to learn more about self-compassion. And self-compassion says no to continuous overwork. And self-compassion says there are times when I need to step out and look after myself. And when we notice that our colleagues are in a place where they're completely burnt out, I read a little thing the other day and it said this really powerful question that we could ask: how do you want me to care about you at the moment? What is it that I can do? How do you want me to take care of you at the moment? And rather than back away. But we need to be able to see or to attend. Otherwise, we walk past our colleagues who are in distress without even noticing.
Yeah, because we're wounded ourselves. We have trouble. That's wonderful. Thank you. I need to repair a little mistake I made earlier, is that I forgot to mention that any questions, please, by Twitter, we recommend that you send it to @GracieLeo here, our wonderful moderator. We can't do anything without her. Look at her. Come on, guys.
No, that's all right.
Anyway, my mistake. So please send any questions, comments as we go along, and also the hashtag DFTB17 will be helpful.
So there's lots of you just warming up on Twitter and a few people who are new to it. So as Tim said, using the hashtag DFTB17, which is nicely in lights there, is great. So we've had a lot of engaged listeners, Mary, and a lot of great comments. Ruth McColman really loved that you said that compassion is not soft, it is courageous. I think that's something we all have to remember. And Claire Chandler from Docs in Socks says, maybe we should channel compassion and we should channel JD from Scrubs. And lastly, Damien Rowland provided a few practical tips from his own experience. He said, practically, this is the arm around the shoulder, the offering of a sweet, the kind word, the twist of humour. So I think we've all been inspired to look at more ways that we can bring compassion to our own workplace.
Thank you.